This is Neil Schneider for MTBS-TV at CES 2014. Joining me, it's almost an annual tradition, is Steve Venuti, President of HDMI Licensing. Welcome to the program, Steve.
Thank you for my annual visit.
Semi-annual. We missed you last year, but that's a story in itself.
You're right. Well, we got 2.0 this year, so we weren't going to miss it for a second.
So let's talk about the upgrade. Now, each year we visited, you had 1.3, 1.4. 2.0 sounds like a big jump. What's the improvement?
Well, 2.0 essentially increases the bandwidth so it can do 4K at 60 frames per second. So it's what the markets wanted in terms of resolution and at frames per second that they wanted, and that required higher bandwidth. That's the number one thing it does. It's got a lot of other features, but I expect the market to really adopt that one the first.
Okay, so why don't we backtrack a little bit as to what HDMI does, because a lot of people may not even appreciate why this is so important. So when we're talking about HDMI, what are we referring to?
HDMI, which is the high definition multimedia interface, is essentially the digital interface between your device that delivers content, HD content, and your device that displays it. So it's an all-in-one cable, does audio and video in one cable. It's all digital, so it's got the highest quality, and it's uncompressed. It doesn't compress anything. So that's what it's been around 10 years now. It's the only way people hook up to get their content now.
And what I'm seeing is HDMI, of course, is growing very popular, not just with the televisions, but I take it in the mobile as well as PC space. Am I correct?
Everybody wants 4K. It's the next jump in resolutions, next jump in quality. It's 4 times the quality of 1080p, so you get better quality, better resolution. It's just it's the next evolution of consumer experience of content.
Now, each year that we've spoken, a topic that consistently comes up is stereoscopic 3D. And the reason that comes up is it has certain high bandwidth requirements to get enough imagery to the screen, especially for gamers, because they want that at least that 60 frames per second, at a high resolution. So what would HDMI 2.0 deliver in that regard?
Well, more bandwidth means we can deliver those sorts of things. So we can do 3D and 4K. So that it's capable of. We also use essentially 3D technology to do something different, which is a gaming application. So rather than left to right, think of it as player 1, player 2, and now wearing 3D glasses, using 3D technology, you can kind of get full screen multiplayer experience, so two people can see different things on the same full screen.
Do you see that as a standardized feature between the different display manufacturers? How does that come into play?
Well, that's what we're doing with 2.0, is making it standardized so that you can now build it in and know that it'll work with everything else. So 3D technology not only is there in terms of 4K resolution, but it's also kind of adapted to do other things now in this kind of multiplayer application.
And which of the manufacturers have adopted the 2.0 standard that you know of?
They never tell me anything. We launch the standard and then they go off and adopt it. So I only know of one HD TV company that's announced product. I've seen other demos. I expect at CES that we'll see all the major Tier 1 guys show 4K using the 2.0 feature set.
Okay. Now, when we're talking about 4K in stereoscopic 3D, is there a frame rate limitation on that?
There's no frame rate limitation. It's all, we're really agnostic about what you put over the pipe. So you can do resolution, you could do frame rate, you could do color bit depth. So there are no limitations on anything. It really depends on what you want to deliver. So if the manufacturer wants to emphasize frame rate, they can. If they want to emphasize color bit depth, they can. But in the case of 4K and 3D, there's no limitation in terms of frame rate.
Okay, so you can do 4K stereoscopic 3D would 60 frames be doable?
That's doable if you do side by side, basically, or top bottom as a format.
Okay, but if you do the full res, let's say we do a page flip
at 60, then no, then you're going to have to give up something. It'd have to be basically 30 frames per second.
Okay.
Per eye.
Okay, very good. So then the next question I have is one of the big things that's building up here at CES is there's a big interest in virtual reality. So Oculus, for example, Sony is expected to release something in this regard. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you're very familiar with this space, but just some open-ended questions for you, is latency. One of the big challenges when dealing with head-mounted displays or immersive technology is you move your head around, you move your body around, and that latency is that delay before seeing your reactions appear on the screen. Are you aware of anything to do with HDMI that would increase latency? Is there any type of latency issues with HDMI that would get in the way of technologies like this?
No, in that case, HDMI really is playing a dumb role. It's a very high-speed interface. It will not contribute to latency at all. Latency you'll see on either side, the source or the sink, the transmitter, the receiver. That's where you're going to see the latency problems. The link won't have any issues with latency.
Okay, very good. And another question I have is, right now, this market I'm talking about is really at a formative stage. I mean, a lot of these products haven't been released to market. We're seeing prototypes. They're using a mixture of HDMI with other technologies to get all the data across. So the HDMI is doing the visual data, and a USB connector is carrying the computer data, so for tracking and so on. And we're seeing different combinations of this. Is it possible for HDMI to be the full pipe, the full data pipe, or is it limited to certain types of data?
So I think it's possible. It's not that HDMI was designed to do that necessarily, but it's possible. HDMI, as you say, is clearly, its core competence is sending high-resolution audio and video data one way, but it has the ability, if you remember in 1.4 we announced the Ethernet channel, which is nothing more than a fat channel back. So if you were to use that, adopt that, you can have very fast kind of communication both ways, and you can have a system that really can react to the other. Now, I don't know if they're considering this, but it's a possible application for that channel.
Excellent. I'm very intrigued about the two people playing the same game at the same time. Now, this would be in 2D, of course, 2D per player. Am I right?
Correct. That's correct, yes.
And are you aware of some manufacturers using this technology based on the standard that HDMI is building?
So I don't know of anybody who's doing it based on the standard. All I can say is I've seen demos of this that were done in proprietary ways and by some of the companies that were very interested in getting it standardized. So my anticipation is that we will see some top-tier manufacturers come out with this, maybe even a CES, using the 2.0 kind of standard way of doing this.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Now, the picture looks the same to me, but I'm going to ask the question, has the cabling changed at all going from 1.3, 1.4 to 2.0? It sounds like a big jump. Is there any physical change in the connector?
No change in the connector, no change in the cable, as long as you're talking about a high-speed cable, right? So we have two kind of speed levels. 1.0 came out and we had a standard, we call it a standard speed level. When 1.3 came out and we bumped the bandwidth to 10.2 gigabits per second, we came out with a high-speed cable, which is 95% of the cables on the market. But existing high-speed cables will also do 18 gigabits per second. Now, people ask me, how can you design a cable for 10 gigabits per second that now do 18? The answer is that we didn't just increase the bandwidth by brute force. We did some interesting things with the signaling. So actually, the stress on the cable is actually less than it would be if you're running 10.2 gigabits at 18 gigabits per second. So the point is, existing cable, same connector, it's all the same.
So are you using some kind of compression technique to make it work?
No compression. It's really a different way of signaling it. So it's a different way of electronically and of packing the data and getting it over, but it's not. It doesn't compress at all. Still uncompressed. We've never introduced compression at all.
Okay. One more question for you. I remember the days of 1.3 and 1.4. Is HDMI had the spec, but then the display makers maybe used a portion of the spec. They didn't necessarily include all the modes that HDMI has to offer. Are we going to have a similar scenario with 2.0? Do you have any guesses on that?
It will be exactly the same. And it's something people don't, it's not an intuitive thing, but it's the reality of the way the HDMI spec is built. We have a number of options, and you could choose to do one, two, or all. I mean, for example, an obvious one of the options in 2.0 is 21:9, support for 21:9 aspect ratio. Well, obviously not everybody's going to do that. You're not going to do it if you don't build a 21:9 aspect ratio monitor. So it'll be the same. We always tell people, don't look for 2.0, look for the feature, because that's really what is they're building using 2.0 technology, but 2.0 in itself is not a designator of product functionality.
So, as an educated guess, what do you anticipate the likely features, the highlights of the display makers that are going to be using HDMI? What are their top priorities this year?
Well, I think the educated guess is even highly educated, because it's obvious to me that 4K 60 is what's going to drive the CE market over the next year. There will be other people that do the dual view, and they'll do some other things, but 4K 60 is by far and away the #1 priority for the manufacturers and what 2.0 can offer.
Okay. Now, on the mobile front, is HDMI 2.0 affecting the mobile market as well?
It is actually, because really 2.0 allows for 4K 60 delivery over a mobile phone, and there are mobile platforms that can do that.
That to me is amazing, that there's mobile platforms doing 4K. I mean, anyway, that's a side topic.
It's true. It's very true. I mean, these are small devices, 4K 60. It's amazing. We were looking at this and marveling over it 5 years ago, thinking it could ever happen, but here it is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I always look forward to interviewing you each year, Steve.
You're welcome. Well, thank you, Neil. Good to see you as always.
So this is Neil Schneider at the HDMI licensing exhibit at CES 2014. We will, of course, be back with more. Thank you for watching.